Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well today. Thank you for joining me. I'll give it a minute for folks to join today's session. And I think I am streaming to, I'm trying to stream to, also stream to Instagram. So give me a minute here while I do that. But while you're listening, feel free to join, chat. Let me know in the comments where you're listening in from. I would love to know where you are, what brings you here today, and let's engage in the conversation about boundaries. So where are you listening in from today? All right. Trying to get Instagram going today, but it is having trouble, so I'm not going to worry about it. Okay. So welcome to Boundaries Are Bonita. I am so glad for you to be here with me today. If you're listening in, let me know where you are in the country. I'm really excited about this conversation. It is a topic that is close to my heart, and to be quite honest, I have this set up for 30 minutes, but we're probably going to go 45 minutes. So I'm just letting you know that up front because there's a lot of content. So again, thank you for being here today. Bienvenidos a Boundaries Are Bonita. Let me know where you're listening in from. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you about boundaries. Over the last decade, I've facilitated a number of work-life balance sessions or conversations around work-life balance. And I noticed that in these conversations, a lot of the issues and challenges that Latina women are having have specifically due or lead back to a lack of boundaries or expectations. And so hearing this over and over kind of birthed this idea, and I created an entire workshop that's about 2.5 hours, all about boundaries, specifically for Latinas, because of some of the unique challenges and cultural narratives that we face. So if you're listening in, let me know where you're listening in from. And I want to take an inventory and just find out, where do you stand with boundaries? Are boundaries, one, easy peasy, no problem for you? You have no problem setting them. Two, is it awkward, but you feel like it's a necessary thing, so you try to enforce them? And three, mission impossible, like you're a doormat, right? And there's no judgment. And if you feel comfortable, go ahead and drop that in the chat, and I'll let some of you join on here while we're getting situated. All right. Give me one second here. Sorry, technology today. All right. Well, thank you for being here. I know that you have a lot on your plate. You're juggling, multiple responsibilities. Kids are on summer break. And so I'm just grateful that you've chosen to jump on here today. Like I said, usually these are about 30 minutes. I'm going to try to make it 30 minutes, but I suspect that we'll go over. So if you need to jump off, go ahead and feel free to jump off. My intention is really a couple things today. I want to talk about what healthy boundaries look like. I want to address some of the cultural and unconscious scripts that impact our relationship with boundaries. And then I want to give you some tools so that you can establish new boundaries for yourself and with others in your world. So I'll save some time at the end for questions that you might have, and you can also just drop them into the chat, and then I'll go back and look at them. And if you're engaging on here, I really want to encourage you to engage in the chat, and also to connect with the other folks that are on this live stream, because if you're here, you probably want to learn. You're probably growth mindset oriented. You probably want to build your network, probably want to be more productive at work, get more visibility. And so this is a great place to build community. There's nothing more than I love than building community. And you can also hit share and message your amigas o compañeras about this live stream, or you can just tag them in the comments. So again, where do you stand with boundaries? Are you a 1, they're easy peasy, no problem for you? Is it 2, awkward, but you realize that it's a necessary thing? Or 3, does it feel like mission impossible, like there's just no way that you can put down boundaries? Let me see if we got some responses here. All right. And if not, don't feel you have to share. I know we're on a public platform. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with the content. And then again, feel free to engage in the chat. So I am thrilled that you're here to explore the power of setting healthy boundaries. For those of you that might not know me, my name is Ruby Garcia. I'm a leadership coach. I bring about 15 years, more than 15 years of experience in my past life from working in corporate. I'm a consultant. I'm a entrepreneur. I'm a daughter of Mexican immigrant parents who grew up in a bicultural family, and I'm also a single mom to two boys. So throughout my own career, I've navigated a lot of different roles, and boundaries has been really key to my success, but more importantly, to my well-being. These days, a lot of my work focuses on helping Latinas increase their visibility, build their confidence and influence so they can make greater impact in the world. And if you want to know more about my work, feel free to check out my LinkedIn. But I also want to give you a little backdrop into who I am as it relates to boundaries. So I learned about boundaries mostly because I grew up with very few. Quite honestly, I grew up in a very, very loving home. And in some ways, we had a lot of boundaries. Like I always had my own bedroom. When it came to physical space, I think our family in general had a lot of boundaries, privacy and, no one was barging in the bathroom. People always knocked before they came in. But when it came to emotional boundaries, there was probably none. And this showed up a lot in my own life, whether it was like lending excessive amounts of money to people, never getting paid back, whether it was involving myself in codependent relationships or friendships, whether it was being taken advantage of in my personal or professional life. And even in my coaching practice during the beginning, I would find myself overextending myself and not having any boundaries with my clients. And it would still be an issue today if I hadn't done a couple things, which was one was actually go through some therapy and healing work. Two is really being conscientious and working towards developing a better relationship with myself and developing self-love and acceptance and confidence and self-care practices that I previously didn't have, and really being conscientious about creating boundaries for myself. So why are boundaries important? Boundaries boost our overall well-being. It improves our mental health. We give ourselves better self-care. We spend time on the things that matter, on our priorities. It allows us to be more productive, and it also helps us maintain healthier and more fulfilling relationships. And when our needs are met and we are respected by others, we tend to experience less conflict and more self-confidence, and I would say more self-love and more self-acceptance too. On the flip side, a lack of boundaries can also cause more stress, cause conflict, can cause feelings of resentment or bitterness, and we might engage in negative relationship patterns. It can also result in an overdeveloped sense of responsibility where we start to minimize our own needs. And I see this especially in eldest daughters and daughters of immigrant parents. I would say that this is actually quite a common theme or issue that comes up. And so I want to dive in, just touch on a couple of the cultural narratives of why this might be so. How cultural narratives like marianismo, collectivism, familia, personalismo, and respeto can often shape our boundaries from an unconscious level. So I have some notes that I'm going to look at also. So marianismo, comes from the cultural belief rooted in the idea of the ideal Latina woman is someone who is self-sacrificing, someone who is nurturing, someone who is devoted, who is like the ideal woman, much like the Virgin Mary. So it is being it is a narrative that encourages women to prioritize other people's needs prior to their own. So a lot of times it shows up as being very difficult to say no, a tendency to take on too many responsibilities to fulfill the perfect caregiver. It could be neglecting our own self-care because we're taking care of other people. With collectivism, this is emphasizing the importance over a group, the importance of the group over the individual. And so this can look like suppressing our own individual needs. It can be a fear of disrupting any group harmony that might prevent individuals from setting necessary boundaries or a reluctance to asserting boundaries. And then also with collectivism, there's a pressure to conform. We all want to maintain a sense of belonging. And so there's a strong expectation to really adhere to the group norms. And that can make it difficult to establish boundaries that fall outside of those norms. Of course, familia, is one of our high values. And so a lot of times we'll prioritize family demands that can lead to neglecting our own personal boundaries. Sometimes there's not as much privacy when it comes to being in a close-knit family, and there's lines that are blurred in terms of personal space and privacy. A lot of times you'll see enmeshment or triangulation, which are common occurrences. And then, maybe it's hard to create boundaries because you have a sense of loyalty or feeling guilty if you were to do that. With personalismo, this is where we are putting the importance around relationships and social connections. And, this makes it hard maybe to create boundaries at work. Maybe we might be overextending ourselves at work in order to, keep the peace and keep the harmony in order to not rock the boat. Maybe some of you have heard that from even your family members. I know it was one of the things that my mom always told me about work. And then, you just reluctant to say anything because you don't want to damage those relationships. And then finally, with respeto, that is, that's huge in our culture. And so we might have a hesitation to challenge authority, or maybe we perceive that as challenging or being aggressive towards our authority. And so we just tend to defer to other people's wishes in order to maintain respect rather than setting up boundaries. So I don't know if any of those maybe you can relate to, but I think it's really important to create for there to be awareness of how these values can impact the way that we see the way that we see boundaries, right? So it's just recognizing the influence, and then also just I want to invite you to consider that what is it that you need for your own well-being that's separate from the cultural expectations. Okay, so just think about that. What are some of the needs that you have that might be separate from cultural expectations? Because again, going back to the collectivism and familia, a lot of times we think in terms of we rather than thinking about ourselves. And it's okay to think about yourself. So here's where I want to start the conversation, and that's that boundaries are very personal. Boundaries are a reflection of your self-worth, and without them, you will suffer at work, at home, and in relationships. You teach others how to treat you based on how you honor yourself and how you respond to the way that others treat you. So it is what you are willing to accept of another person's words or actions. And why are personal boundaries helpful? It's because they promote trust, it improves our well-being, and it also improves the authenticity and intimacy in relationships. I like to say that boundaries do not break relationships, but they really preserve them. They increase your resilience, they increase your self-confidence, they increase your self-esteem, and they really do help you prioritize the people, the causes, and the things that matter most to you. And without healthy boundaries, what I've personally experienced and what I've witnessed that a lot of women experience are feelings of resentment, disappointment, feeling betrayed, feeling neglected. And there are even times when many individuals don't even realize that a boundary has been crossed. And so they wonder but they feel it. And so that's what I would say is listen to your body wisdom, because you might feel it in your body first before you realize it consciously. So you might feel it in the pit of your stomach. right? You might feel like your butterflies in your stomach, or maybe your stomach gets really tight, or your shoulders get all tense, or in your jawline gets tense, or maybe you feel it in your throat because you want to say something, but you don't. Those are signs that perhaps it's time to get curious and see if there's a boundary that's been crossed. And this might surprise you, but there are like 10 different boundaries, 10 different types of boundaries. So there's physical boundaries, which is more about your personal space, how comfortable are you with touch, prioritizing rest, how close you want someone to be. There are emotional boundaries. So how others talk to us and treat us, how to separate between what's yours or what's mine, which is the enmeshment that I was talking about earlier. There's time in terms of how much time you give to others. I'm looking at my notes too. Where do you donate your time? How much are you charging for your time? There's material boundaries, like your belongings. Like if you're going to lend things, like someone's going to borrow your car or a book or whatever it is. There's verbal boundaries. So maybe you're going to limit certain conversations. Maybe you decide not to engage in conversations. For example, maybe money, politics, and religion are off limits, right? There are sexual boundaries. Yes, we're going to go there. There's sexual boundaries. So there's things like consent. What are you willing to engage in? What are you not willing to engage in? Spiritual boundaries. What religious practices or spiritual practices are you going to engage in or not engage in? Intellectual, which is like your thoughts or ideas that you might have, how you communicate those ideas, making sure that you're getting credit for your work. This is a big one. And when is it time to have a conversation if there's conflict? There's energy, which, think about those energy vampires. You might have heard that. People who are drained are emotional energy, and think also about the frequency that you're giving off to others, right? And then lastly is, I think this is the last one. Yeah, financial. So whether you're willing to share, donate, give others, lend money, those are all different types of boundaries. And again, I just want to emphasize that boundaries preserve and safeguard relationships. And so those are 10 different ones: emotional, physical, intellectual, sexual, financial, spiritual, verbal, time, energy, and materials. And you might just consider, what is the one boundary that you need to work on with intention? Or ask yourself which boundary of those categories feels the most difficult for you, because that might be something that you want to clue into. And there are a couple different boundary styles that I want to explain to you too, because I think this is really important. This was something that I just learned maybe in the last, 5 years or so of my own personal work. And there's 3 different boundary styles. There's the person, we all know someone like this, that overshares personal information. They have a hard time saying no, and they're giving in to others. They seem to be overly involved in other people's problems or situations. They're very dependent on opinions of others. They kind of are the people pleasers, right? They tend to tolerate abuse or disrespect. They fear rejection a lot of times. And that's called a porous boundary style. And a way that I like to think of a porous boundary style is that someone who's connected, like is very easily connected to other people, but they're not protecting themselves. Okay, so that's connected and not protected. Second is rigid. Rigid is you're protected, but you're not connected. So this person is kind of like the also the frozen what is it, from Frozen, right? She's like the ice queen. So she's someone maybe that avoids intimacy and close relationships. She's someone who's not likely to ask for help. She's someone who might isolate. She has really few relationships that are close or intimate. She may even seem a bit detached and cold. And she likes to kind of keep others at arm's length distance. And she's also very afraid of rejection. And so that's rigid boundaries, protected but not connected. And then there's healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries are when you're protected and you're connected. And this is when you value other people's opinions. You don't compromise your values for others. You're able to decipher and have discernment about what information is appropriate to share and with whom. You're also in tune with your own wants, needs, and desires, and you're okay with articulating them and asking for what you need, and you're okay when others say no. So again, you might want to just think, where do you fall in terms of your boundary style? Do you tend to be porous, meaning that you're connected, but you're not really protected? Do you tend to be rigid, where you're very protected, but then you don't have the connection that you want with others? Or is it healthy where you're both protected and connected? If you feel comfortable, feel free to drop that in the chat. And again, if you have questions, also drop that in the chat and I will circle back around to them. So how do we create healthy boundaries? And it is a multifaceted process, I will say that. And the first thing that I would advise you to is just to feel your feelings. So this means that you're going to recognize and accept your feelings rather than dismiss them, minimize them, ignore them, suppress them. So allowing yourself to experience emotions fully can help you give clarity about what boundaries you need for your own well-being. And I really recommend breathing exercises. Can be a really powerful tool for this process because they help you calm your mind and your body. And that helps you to make it a little easier to come up with boundaries from a place of, serenity, from calmness, from a place of focus. The second thing is really to set clear expectations when it comes to creating boundaries. And this means that you really have to understand what you need from yourself and from others, and you have to be able to articulate those needs effectively. So clear communication is going to be absolutely key. You want to be able to express your boundaries assertively, but still respectfully. And when a boundary is crossed, it's going to be important for you to identify which boundary was crossed and why it matters to you. And you might think about what is the outcome that you would have preferred, and that can help you for the next time to be able to reinforce that boundary in the future. Which brings me to number 3, which is preparing for future instances when there might be a need to put boundaries in place. So anticipating, like, for example, when I went through my divorce, it was a very difficult time. This is like 10 years ago, but emotions were definitely really high. And I knew some of my triggers. I knew some of my ex's triggers. And I had to think about, how am I going to respond so that I can keep my boundaries in place? And that meant, like, I literally had Post-it notes, as a matter of fact, Post-it notes where I would write like the sentence that I would say in order to maintain my boundary, because I wasn't good at having those in place. So you want to be able to anticipate what boundaries might be tested and plan your responses in advance. And this can help you feel, a little more confident. It can help you feel a little more control. It's not like something's coming at you from left field. And then 4 is to identify your non-negotiables. I think this is super important. A non-negotiable is a boundary that's not open for discussion or modification. So think of them as your hard no's, right? These are things that you either must have, or it's something that you absolutely can't have in order to stay in the relationship. So you may have non-negotiables like, I will not tolerate cheating, or I will never be with someone who uses drugs, or I will not tolerate like physical abuse is like a hard no, and that means that relationship is cut off. And I would really encourage you, when it comes to your non-negotiables or hard no's, to write them down on a sheet of paper and commit to them. Because when we have a lack of boundaries, it also invites a lack of respect. And when we have these non-negotiables set up and we identify them, this is also the way that we show people the door if they break those boundaries. And then lastly, just practice self-compassion. This is a process, so there's a learning curve. So be gentle with yourself as you're learning to navigate this. I would say start small if you haven't yet developed the competency with building boundaries. Start small so that you can protect your emotional and mental health. And the more that you do it, the easier it becomes, I promise you. And you'll have so much more peace and joy and fulfillment and respect in your relationships as a result. A reminder, and this is really important, a reminder. You can control how you respond. You can control your self-talk, your boundaries, your expectations, how you handle stress. You cannot control how others respond. You cannot control how others respond to how they react to you. You cannot control what other people say or think. You can't control other people's choices or the behavior of others. And that's just a reminder, because I know that we want to sometimes we want to assume that our boundaries are other people's boundaries or vice versa. And it's not always the case. It's our job, remember, to teach others how to treat us when we're in relationship with them. One of the things that has come up a lot as I've taught either my own workshop, Boundaries or Bonita, or these work-life balance sessions is, how hard it is to say no. And I want you to give yourself permission to say no. It's okay. You can say no gracefully. Sometimes I just like to flat out tell people, like, no, not interested. No way, no how, no can do. And then I'm like done. But for some people, I know it's a little more difficult because they haven't had the facility with saying no. And so you might think about, I have a list, if anyone's interested, I have a list of 25 different ways to say no. If you need a nice way to say no, and it could be something like, hey, I'd love to help, but I'm not available right now. Or it could be like, I don't have capacity, but let me give you a referral. Or, I'm honored, but I can't commit. Can you ask me in 6 months? There are lots of different ways to be able to say no gracefully, but know that you can just say no, and that is enough. When you're setting boundaries, the one thing I want to caution you is to go slowly. I would like to say proceed with caution, right? Put one of those warning signs up, those warning signs up. Proceed with caution. Go slow. If you've never had boundaries and all of a sudden you're enforcing boundaries or sharing those new boundaries with someone, expect pushback. People aren't going to be used to that, and they're going to test you on it. And so expect that pushback, and that's where it comes really in handy to have to really think about ways to be able to resist that pushback. What are those lines that you're going to come up with in order to continue to enforce that boundary? Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. Like I said, I grew up with not a lot of boundaries in some ways, and saying no, or, I just wanted to be a people pleaser. So I often said yes when I really wanted to say no. And so one of it is just leaning into that discomfort, knowing that the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. I have no problem saying no whatsoever now. It's very easy to me. But I will say this. Even though it's much easier, there are still certain situations or circumstances where it can catch me off guard. But I'm aware of them and have tools in my toolbox in order to help me get through. So I find that even though it might be difficult, and sometimes I am caught off guard or find myself pushed up against a possible boundary, I can work through it. So even as comfortable as I am, it still hits me sometimes. And then also, like, give yourself space, because sometimes when you're putting up boundaries, that means people will fall off, and you might need to grieve some of those relationships that end. In in all, I want to say that setting boundaries is a radical act of self-love. It is a reclamation of self, and it's a way to empower ourselves. It is an opportunity to practice honoring ourselves and learning not to self-abandon, because as women, as Latinas, that is so much of what we do. We self-abandon in order to meet the needs of others. And in this way, it gives us the opportunity to live intentionally and to live a life that is based on our own values, our own desires, and our own priorities. And so to move forward, we really have to be able to listen from within. Brene Brown said, remember, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. So boundaries truly are an act of self-love. They're an expression of how we love ourselves and how we honor ourselves. And others will follow suit, right, when we start to do that. So I just, hopefully that helps you. It's been something that has been, to be quite honest, it's been life work for me with boundaries. It's been something I've had to work through over the years. There is a hospice nurse, I don't remember the name of the book, but she wrote a book called, I think it was like the 5 regrets of the dying. And the number one regret was when folks were on their deathbed was living their life for someone else instead of living the life that they wanted. And so, I also think when we're thinking about boundaries, who are we living for? Are we just living for according to someone else's expectations, or do we want to live according to what is important to us, to our priorities, to our values? And those do matter, right? And so many of us have self-silence or been taught or conditioned to self-silence, to put aside our own needs for others, but we cannot give from an empty cup. We have to fill our own cups and then give from the overflow. So I want to thank you again. If this is something you struggle with, let me know. My calendar link is in my bio on LinkedIn, but I want to open up to any questions. If there are questions about boundaries, let me know what those are. I'm happy to answer them. Just looking at my notes to see if there's anything else, but the big message is we need to value ourselves, and boundaries are a way that we can do that. We're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. We're not always going to be the best fit. We're not always going to be liked for everyone. And that's okay. That's okay. So any questions, drop those in the chat. Again, thank you for joining today. Boundaries are Bonita. This is a very condensed version because this is usually a 2 to 2.5 hour workshop that's really in depth. But I wanted to just give you some information to get you started, at least with practicing setting up those boundaries. I appreciate you being here today, and just looking to see if there's any questions. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Jenny, for being here. Marisol, Arleth. Thank you so much. Okay, no questions. And if you're not comfortable, feel free to DM me. DM me your questions or your thoughts. If you want that list of 25 ways to say no, reach out, just send me in the DM 25 ways to say no, and I'll send you a list of different ways, and hopefully that can help you. So thanks for joining today. Everyone, have a great day. Bye now.